Well, welcome. We're very glad to have you with us on Curiosity, Not Judgment. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
Today we are coming to you from mostly sunny San Diego. We are here for a trade show, and we've got just a little blip of time before we need to head over to the convention center, but we wanted to be consistent with keeping new content coming out every week and wanted just to continue the conversation amongst ourselves and with you so that we can continue to be very intentional with relationship building. And so you had a little epiphany this morning about three kind of key components to helping improve relationships. So tell me about what that epiphany was.
Well, it's an epiphany. It's more of an assimilation of observations, which is something that I strive for. And it's not meant to be a hard and fast process that works in every situation, but more of guidelines that kind of help frame what I see goes wrong in a lot of relationships and how to and some things you can do to prevent them. I am not an expert on this. I am trying to be. One of my major themes for this year is relationships, both at home and in the community and with my nonprofit activities, with business, et cetera. And I just feel like I see a lot of people just kind of missing each other out there these days.
Absolutely.
And so not so much of an epiphany as an assimilation of observations that will hopefully be helpful to our viewers. And really it comes down to over a series of conversations I've had the last week. And it has to do with curiosity, not judgment, in that really good questions help to tease this out. And what it really was around setting expectations, being matching pace with the person or people or group that you're dealing with, and then the last is frictionless transactions. And I just feel like if we can all strive for those things, then the better. And just as a 100,000 foot level, and then we can get into details on each one, because I apologize again for being an engineer, but everything for me is 3s and 5s, and by the end of this, it might turn out to be 5 with your input. But setting expectations is so key. I see so many times when people come together and they're looking for totally different radical outcomes, or they just want to push their agenda and have no interest in the other agendas in the room. On and on and on and on. So as much as possible, you don't have to be as direct as, so what was your expectation coming into this meeting? Although a lot of facilitators start out with that.
Yep, I've heard it.
What is your agenda for today? What do you want to get out of today? And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think we can tease it out in a more conversational, less formal way. At least that's my style, which is, more along the lines of, oh, wow, okay, I think I'm hearing that you're thinking that we're going to do this, and I was thinking we're going to do this. Or I think we're looking at the same kind of outcome, but your approach and my approach might be different in these ways. Did I get that right? In other words, just asking questions around, especially when you perceive things. I know that my modus operandi a lot of times is when I perceive something that's different, and I know that somebody else is trying to come at something differently, I'll just kind of come in with mine stronger. It's like the ugly American and European. I'll just speak English more loudly and hope that you get it, right? Which is not, well, it's not an effective approach in my experience. So anyway, so that's the expectation setting up front. And then the matching pace. How often do we come across people in this world who are extroverts and introverts, or who are want to get something done now, and somebody else is saying, we've got some time on this, and I don't move that quickly, and you're not going to make me move that quickly. Right. We see this all the time. We know that's the experience. What if we all strove to match the pace of the other person as much as possible, and not in a enabling way of bad behavior at all, just a sincere effort to match pace with the person, just because we know that things might go better, or we think that things might go better. I think that's my current thesis. And then the last one, which is frictionless transactions. What can we do to make this frictionless? Where's the easy button from the old Staples commercials? How do we hit that button and just say, there's hard ways to do this, there's my way to do this is your way to do this. How can we come up with some way that's easy for everyone to do this and to buy in? And do we need some more input to make sure it's frictionless, not only for us, but for some of our key stakeholders.
Yeah. I will say two of the three categories, I'm going to push back just a little bit, not in a rebuttal type of a way, but just because I think about things very differently than you do. So the
Thank God.
the first one that really stands out to me is the frictionless transaction. And what I think of is what has happened during COVID in literal transactions at the grocery store, at the department store. Everyone was about avoiding touch, avoiding contact. You're not going to pass cash. You're going to tap your credit card on a machine. You're going to have minimal interaction. And so when I think of frictionless transactions, I almost have a negative connotation in my mind. Friction, you don't want the static electricity of friction, right? You don't want your hair standing up, but you want there to be some degree of touch in a transaction, to have it be connected person to person. Because otherwise, my observation is, just like when you go to a grocery store, you tap your credit card on a machine, you avoid contact, you've got your mask on, and you walk away. There's been no engagement with the person whose role is to help you check out or to get your supplies, whatever the case may be. And that dehumanizes one party in the transaction, and maybe even both. And so I have a little bit of a catch with that notion of a frictionless transaction.
So well said and so wise. I agree 100%. Just in the elevator this morning on the way down from my hotel room, there was a couple of maintenance guys that came onto the elevator afterwards, and we said, "Say, hey, how you doing? How you doing?" And they said, "We're doing great. Good morning so far." And I said, "Yeah, how do you know? How do you know you're doing great? What's your metric?" And I always just love to interact with people like that. And you're exactly right. During COVID, with plexiglass and contactless and everything, it's like, am I dealing with a human or a machine? And I, for one, love to, as Robert Fulghum used to say, he was a player, not a playa, a player. And a player in life is somebody who just kind of, in a friendly fashion, interacts with people, even strangers at the grocery store or in line. And I totally agree with you. It's a great question to help me try to understand more what I mean by frictionless transactions. Not what I mean, but what I think the concept is. And that is frictionless with humans, right? Not with machines. Frictionless with how is this human being and this human being reacting different, and seeing not only just appreciating the differences, valuing the differences, and saying this is a yin-yang. How can we work together to make a new set of assumptions that's frictionless for both of us because we're both bought in? So that's the way I meant it when I said it, but I appreciate the clarification, because the last thing I want is frictionless transactions that don't involve human beings. Human beings, that's why we're here.
Yeah.
I mean, my goodness, this is life, and I'm not in favor of frictionless transactions with machines.
Sure. Well, so maybe it's just replacing or swapping the two words. Maybe it's a less friction transaction rather than a frictionless, because there's going to inevitably be a point of contact in any conversation that may cause a little bit of rubbing. You want less of that so that you don't get to the point where, again, you've raised the hair on everybody's heads, but you want enough so that there's a person-to-person connection, there is buy-in, there is engagement, there is a looking each other in the eye, understanding what the other person is saying, and being very intentional in relationship and conversation.
So how about fun friction relationships versus frictionless transactions? I love that.
That's a lot of words.
It is. And so frictionless transactions is easy to say, but I agree with you completely. It should be more of the fun friction relationships based on that. So we'll have to come up with another term.
Okay, fair enough.
But thanks for helping me define that. That's good.
Sure. So matching pace. Here's what I think about matching pace. I remember the first couple years of marriage when my husband and I would be walking somewhere. I'm a fast walker. I've got long legs. I've got a pace about me, and I just want to go. And he's more of a dawdler.
Yeah.
And I would drive him absolutely crazy and vice versa. And we did not match pace well. And my natural gait is such that it really takes a concerted effort for me to slow down and to match pace with my husband. But it's an act of service, right? It's an act of sacrifice, because that's not my normal way that I want to do things. And so that's where the challenge comes in. So talk to me about what you mean in the terms of doing this in maybe business relationships or otherwise.
I can't think of a better visualization actually than that. I have the same problem with my wife. She's the slow one in our relationship, and I'm always looking back going, "Are you intentionally walking 5 paces behind me?" She says, "Why are you running?" And I'm, neither one of us. I'm not running, and she's not intentionally being 5 paces behind. And so, when I decide to go do something, and it's funny, sometimes she'll say, "Do you even know where you're going?" "No, but I'm making good time," right? It's like, I can't stand still. I have to go. And that is a personality trait, but it's exactly right. It's not going to be effective. People won't arrive at the same place at the right time unless they match pace, and that's a purely fantastic visualization because we've all experienced that. And I think that we've had this conversation before. A lot of times, a lot of people say that the best marriages are where opposites have attracted, and of course you have a large amount of overlap. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been attracted to each other in the first place. But there's a lot of things that are opposite, and I think matching pace is a good metaphor for a lot of those things. Matching the pace at which we spend money. Versus how we earn money, and matching the pace on children and activities, and matching pace. I mean, I can think of a bunch of ways where this makes sense, and I think it's really important in family situations, in relationships where it really matters. And we've talked about how, if you're just dealing with somebody buying a used car, poor used car salesman, right? Then maybe it's not so important. But boy, if it's a relationship that matters, if you're not matching pace, I dare say it's not going to work long term. And I think what I do often, I'll just speak for me, is I just try to go so fast, and I expect people to catch up. It's almost like I'm stretching a rubber band, and like somebody much smarter than me, I think it was Jim Collins or somebody said, you can stretch the rubber band, but don't break the rubber band. And so, at some point, if there's not a matching of pace, it doesn't work. So am I going to try to just keep stretching the rubber band and causing tension, literally? Or am I going to slow down a little bit, in my case? Can the other person speed up a little bit? In other words, it would be easier if everyone tried to match pace all the time.
Sure.
It's not realistic all the time, and it's not necessary all the time, but wouldn't it be wonderful if that was everybody's intent?
But I will say you're the only one who can be intentional about matching a pace, because you can't cause someone else to want to match.
That's exactly right.
And so there may or may not be opportunity to even have that conversation about a matched pace. And so if you don't have opportunity to speak into that other person and say, hey, I'd really appreciate if you'd match me in this. So if that conversation can't happen for whatever reason, all you can do is control your own pace.
That's
whether
right.
that mean speed up, slow down.
That's right.
Whatever that looks like, the entire burden really falls to you unless the other person is willing to meet you halfway.
That's right. And I think there is a lot of interactions I know that I see where I'm intentional towards something in that relationship, where the other person naturally then is, and whether they're conscious of it or not, are more motivated to do in kind. And so I think you're right. You're exactly right. We cannot tell someone else to match our pace.
Right.
We can try.
Yeah.
And I often do, and it doesn't work, right?
Sure.
Very well. But if I try and I put forth the effort first, it's like I tell people, I have a certificate of license to marry and bury people. And if I'm doing a marriage ceremony, I always talk about how a lot of people these days think it's 50-50. And it's not. It has to be 100-100, and hope you're not both crazy on the same day. And because if the intent is 50-50, it will never work, because your definition of 50 and the other person's definition of 50 isn't there. You can only control yourself. Very, very wise statement. So I try 100% as much as I possibly can and as much as I can bear, and hopefully that tweaks the other person to try a little bit too. But I tell you what, if we're dependent on the other person trying, or we give up, you're done.
Yeah. All right, the third one has now jumped out of my head. The third of
Setting
the three
expectations.
Expectations. Well, I think that conversation that we just had really flows into that one. We can only set expectations for ourselves. We can, we obviously have some expectations that we'd like to see fulfilled by the other person, but we cannot set an expectation for somebody else. We can only set them for ourselves. And so, again, this is going to boil down to conversation and what degree of transparency, what degree of, genuine communication you can have with somebody. And again, it's always going to be determined by the type of transaction, the type of relationship. If it's in a business setting, you can be intentional with your words. You can be intentional about wanting to match their pace. You can be intentional about a lot of things, but your expectations may never match the other person's.
By definition, probably not.
Yeah. So how do you begin to have some introductory conversation with somebody? Maybe you don't have a super tight relationship with them, so that you can at least get closer aligned on expectations. You may never match it, but to at least get in the same ballpark.
Again, these threes came right in my mind as you were talking. So let's start with one-on-one relationships. You're right. You cannot set someone's expectations for them, but you can influence their expectations. And I think that being very upfront about your expectations. Look, I'm only talking for me here, but my expectation from this meeting is this. My expectation from this transaction is this. My expectation for this event is this. I'm thinking about a family at a theme park.
Okay.
You got 5 different people in a family, 3 kids and 2 adults. Guaranteed there is going to be total different agendas.
Yeah.
One person's going to try to get 20 rides in. Another person's going to say, I just want 1 or 2. Another person's going to say, I don't want any roller coasters. Another person's going to say, I don't want any shows. Right? And so, okay, what can we do? I started individual, then I went to groups, but it just came into my mind.
Sure.
What can we do as a group to help set expectations? Here's my expectation for today. Why don't you share yours? Why don't you share yours? Let's look for some common ground and see what we can do so that our day together is the best. Do we have the expectation that we even stay together? Me as dad, I was always like, hey, I want this to be all done together. And I wish I could say that I was always so good about it that's my expectation. Do you guys buy in? I think I was like, we're staying together, right? And so I've learned over the years. But anyway, the point is, in a situation, you're exactly right. I can't set your expectations, but I can say what mine are, and I can I can facilitate or encourage a discussion about everybody's and try to find common ground.
I like your theme park example because one might think, of course, everyone has the same expectation when walking in the gates. You've paid an exorbitant amount of money and you want maximum benefit for your expenditure, right? But that's not the case, because your 7-year-old who has no concept of value of the money that you've spent maybe only wants to see a particular character. And if these things are not clearly vocalized, there's going to be a lot of irritation, there's going to be a lot of hurt feelings, and at the end of the day, inevitably, several people are going to end up disappointed. And I think the same thing can potentially hold true in a business setting. You've got three or five, we like your numbers, people gathered around a table, virtually or physically. And maybe, person A's expectation is, okay, we're going to have a timeline mapped out by the end of this at which we're going to all be unified and we can all sign off on the dotted line. Maybe somebody else is thinking, oh, well, this is just an introductory conversation, a kind of get to know you moment, and we just want to, feel everybody out. And those two things are so removed from one another. Again, you're going to have some major frustration if the expectations are not set up front.
And wouldn't it be good to have those things up front on the table versus discover them down the road, or just to be so frustrated with each other that the transaction ends before it can even start?
Sure. Is it too, choppy just to walk in the door, after the meeting gets started, say, okay, my expectation for today is X?
I like to be more conversational, as we started out the conversation on this. But I don't think that's out of line. I think that, and then there are many people who do that. I mean, master facilitators come in, and that's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
Tell me your expectation for the day. Tell me your expectation for the day. Or they'll do it as a group. Raise your hand. Tell me what your expectations are for the day. I think it depends on your style too, right? And if you're the boss, look, I can lay down the line and say, I spent the money on this theme park day, and we're going to do things my way. That's a way to approach things. And this is my expectation, and since I'm the one paying for it, that's my day. And many bosses will come in to a group meeting like that and say, here's the expectation, here's the outcome I want, Come on, let's go figure out how to get it done. Got any ideas? Got any ideas? If they're even asking, that's probably presumably why they have the meeting,
Yep.
is to get other people's input. Some people know it's just, here's what we're going to do, and you need to get in line. I'm not going to say whether one's the best approach or the other. I would say that unless everybody in the room's expectations are heard, you're going to start losing people. There's going to be misaligned expectations, and there's going to start to be dysfunction. And it may not even be apparent to the group why, because the expectations were not up front.
Well, I think we have thrown a lot of things out on the table for consideration today. A lot of good questions to start asking yourself, whether this is in a family setting or in a business setting, to really begin to be intentional about communication, to ask some of those good questions, to consider your own pace, your own expectation. How do you begin to respond when friction develops? So I like your 3 points for today. I think those were inspired points for us to consider as we just continue on this journey of curiosity, not judgment. And so, as always, we just welcome folks to leave comments on whatever channel you're watching this on, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you find yourself today. Welcome your comments. So curiositynotjudgment.com if you want to see a full list of all the platforms we're on. And we'll catch up with you next week.
Take care.